Ladies and gentlemen, in the year 1865, as the American Civil War came to an end, a different kind of battle was being fought, not with guns or politics, but with grit, perseverance, and the unforgiving terrain of the American frontier. One woman, Sarah Raymond, became an unlikely symbol of survival and courage during one of the harshest times in pioneer history. Sarah Raymond was born in the mid-1840s in Illinois, a state rapidly growing amid the industrial and agricultural changes of pre-Civil War America. She was raised in a modest but hard-working household, where values like discipline, faith, and education were deeply instilled. From a young age, Sarah showed a remarkable intellect and an intense curiosity about the world beyond her rural surroundings. Unlike many girls of her time who were expected to focus solely on domestic duties, Sarah was encouraged to read, write, and pursue learning. By the time she was in her teens, she had already begun teaching at a local schoolhouse, a rare and respected position for a young woman in her community. Despite her youth, Sarah carried herself with maturity. Life in Illinois wasn't easy. Harsh winters, poor roads, and the looming tensions of national conflict all shaped her formative years. She grew up hearing stories of the Western frontier, of vast open lands, of gold waiting in the rivers of Montana, and of families who risked everything to start anew. These tales stirred something deep within her, a sense of adventure, perhaps, or a calling to be part of something larger than the limits of her town. Her family was close-knit, and decisions were made together. So, when news came that a wagon train was forming to journey westward to the Montana Territory, rumored to be a place of opportunity and new beginnings, it sparked both fear and fascination. Sarah, barely out of adolescence, faced a choice that would forever change her life: to stay behind in safety or to join her family on a journey filled with danger, uncertainty, and the unknown. With the grit she had unknowingly been building her whole life, Sarah chose the trail in the spring of 1865, as the last echoes of the Civil War faded and the fractured nation began to heal. Sarah Raymond and her family prepared for a very different kind of battle, their own westward migration. The United States was shifting rapidly, and for many families like the Raymonds, the promise of land, fortune, and freedom in the West was too powerful to ignore. Tales of gold in the rivers of Montana and the availability of rich farmland spread like wildfire through rural communities, inspiring thousands to pack up their lives and join the Great Migration. Sarah's family was among them. They sold off what little they had: livestock, tools, and furniture, trading stability for the unknown. They bought a covered wagon, loaded it with food, bedding, books, farming tools, and Sarah's most treasured possession, her journal. For many, the journey west was a collective act of faith, driven by equal parts desperation and hope. It was not a vacation or an adventure. It was a one-way trip into the unknown, with no guarantees of survival. The wagon train they joined consisted of dozens of other families, single men, former soldiers, and even orphans. Oxen strained under the weight of loaded wagons, and horses kicked up dust as the long caravan wound its way out of Illinois and toward the vast frontier. The pace was slow, often just 10 to 15 miles a day, and the rhythm of daily life quickly fell into a grueling routine. Rise at dawn, eat a quick meal of hardtack or bacon, hitch the wagons, and walk all day under the blazing sun or through bone-chilling winds. Sarah wasn't just a passenger. Like many women on the trail, she was expected to do her share of the work: cooking over open fires, mending clothes, tending to the sick, and keeping the younger children occupied. The days were long, and the nights were often filled with fear. Howling wolves in the distance, rumors of raiders or hostile tribes, and the ever-present threat of disease that could spread rapidly through the camp. Every creaking wheel, and every thunderstorm felt like a test. But Sarah paid close attention. She observed people, landscapes, and the shifting moods of the caravan. She noticed how easily hope could turn to despair, and how courage had to be renewed each morning. Her journal entries from those early days on the trail capture the strange mix of awe and anxiety, recording the smell of wild sage, the endless stretch of prairie, and the unspoken fears that clung to every traveler like dust. The trail was more than a road. It was a crucible, and Sarah was just beginning to understand how much it would demand from her. The trail west was not just a physical path through the wilderness. It was a brutal test of survival, resilience, and adaptability. For Sarah Raymond and the others in her wagon train, each day brought a fresh set of challenges, many of which they were utterly unprepared for. The romanticized vision of pioneering life quickly gave way to the stark reality of traversing thousands of miles across unforgiving terrain with limited resources and little to no support. The first major obstacle was the land itself. The plains stretched endlessly in all directions, offering little shade and even less comfort. Wagon wheels constantly got stuck in deep mud after rains or cracked under the strain of rough terrain. Rivers had to be forded, sometimes waist-deep and ice-cold, other times raging and swollen from storms. One wrong move could lead to the loss of a wagon, livestock, or worse, a life. The Rocky Mountains loomed ahead as a distant, menacing reminder that the hardest part of the journey still lay in wait. Weather was an unpredictable enemy. Scorching heat could blister the skin and sap the energy of man and beast alike, while sudden storms could bring freezing rain and powerful winds that tore through tents and wagons. Lightning was a constant threat on the open plains, and many nights were spent in drenched clothing with no fire to warm them. But perhaps more deadly than the elements was disease. With dozens of people living in close quarters, illness spread quickly. Cholera, dysentery, and typhoid fever claimed lives without warning. There were no doctors on the trail, just basic remedies, prayer, and luck. Graves were dug hastily on the roadside, marked with simple wooden crosses or stones. Sarah wrote in her journal about a young girl named Emily, who died in the night after a brief illness. Just one of many such tragedies they would witness. Food supplies, carefully rationed, began to dwindle faster than expected. Hunting was unreliable, and wild berries or roots were difficult to find in unfamiliar territory. Salt pork, dried beans, and hardtack became monotonous staples, and hunger often gnawed the travelers, especially the children. On top of all this, there was the constant tension of potential attacks. While not all native tribes were hostile, many were understandably defensive of their lands. Rumors and fear ran rampant in the camp. Campfires were kept small, and lookouts were posted at night. The sound of distant hooves or unfamiliar cries in the darkness was enough to send waves of panic through the group. Mechanical failures, snake bites, exhaustion, emotional breakdowns all became part of the daily experience. There were no breaks, no second chances, and no turning back. Every mile westward demanded a sacrifice, and every step challenged the limits of human endurance. As the weeks on the trail wore on, the physical and emotional toll of the journey began to weigh heavily on everyone in the wagon train. Tempers flared, morale waned, and exhaustion became a constant companion. For Sarah Raymond, the breaking point came when her father, once the steady hand guiding their family through the unknown, fell gravely ill. He had been their anchor, the one who handled the oxen, managed the supplies, and made crucial decisions during moments of uncertainty. His sudden weakness threw the family into disarray. The illness struck fast. One morning, he simply couldn't rise from his bedroll. Fever gripped him, and his speech became slurred. With limited medical supplies and no professional care, The outlook was grim. Many families in similar situations had no choice but to abandon the weak, to press on with the caravan rather than risk falling behind and becoming easy targets. But Sarah refused to accept that fate. Her instincts, honed by years of quiet observation and deep inner strength, kicked in. In that moment of crisis, something within her shifted. Without hesitation, Sarah took control. Though she had never driven oxen before, she climbed onto the wagon bench and took the reins in trembling hands. With guidance from a neighboring traveler and a few nervous glances back at her ailing father, she guided the massive beast forward. At first, she was clumsy and unsure, her commands barely above a whisper. But necessity is a powerful teacher. Within days, Sarah was navigating the wagon with surprising confidence, learning how to read the animals, how to balance the shifting weight, and how to avoid ruts and hidden hazards on the trail. She also took over managing the family's dwindling supplies. Each night, she calculated how many days' worth of food they had left, dividing portions with care. She cooked for her siblings, cleaned wounds, and kept spirits alive, not only within her own family, but within the greater group. Others began to notice her resilience. A few even started seeking her counsel. She became a quiet, steadying presence among the chaos, a role model for other young women who had never imagined such burdens could fall on their shoulders. Despite her youth, Sarah exuded a calm authority. She listened more than she spoke, made decisions methodically, and always remained focused on survival. Where many turned to fear, she turned to action. She kept her journal close, scribbling notes by firelight, recording not just the events of the day, but the choices she was forced to make and the weight they carried. Sarah Raymond hadn't set out to become a leader. She had left Illinois as a young schoolteacher, ready to support but not to command. And yet, the trail didn't care about intentions. It demanded transformation. And Sarah rose to meet it, one step, one decision, one hardship at a time. While the physical challenges of the trail were punishing, it was the emotional and mental toll that quietly wore down even the strongest of pioneers. The monotony of long, endless days under a scorching sun, the constant fear of disaster, and the weight of witnessing suffering day after day, all of it began to chip away at the spirit. For many, the struggle wasn't just to survive the terrain, but to keep their minds from unraveling under the pressure. For Sarah Raymond, maintaining mental strength became just as vital as steering a wagon or rationing food. Sarah's strength wasn't loud or dramatic. It was a quiet, enduring force that she carried deep within her. Where father fell ill and her family looked to her for leadership, she didn't collapse under the weight of responsibility. But that didn't mean she was unaffected. She felt the fear, the helplessness, the loneliness, but instead of being consumed by it, she transformed it into purpose. Her secret weapon was her journal. Each night, after the fires had dimmed and the camp had settled into uneasy silence, Sarah would write. Sometimes by flickering candlelight, sometimes in near darkness, she poured her thoughts onto the pages. She wrote about the miles they'd covered, the people they'd lost, the skies above and the dust below. She described the sounds of coyotes howling in the distance and the deep silence that followed the loss of a fellow traveler. She wrote about the people in her wagon train, those who comforted others, and those who collapsed under the weight of despair. Her journal became more than a diary. It was a mirror for her emotions, a place where she could process what she couldn't say aloud. In those pages, she admitted her fears, her doubts, and her grief. She also captured moments of beauty, the way the sunrise painted the plains gold, the rare laughter of a child, or the kindness of a stranger offering a biscuit when she hadn't eaten all day. It was in writing that she found clarity, and in clarity, she found the strength to keep going. Sarah also became a quiet pillar for others. Though still a teenager herself, she took the time to comfort those grieving lost loved ones. She'd sit with widows and orphans, offering them companionship in a world that felt increasingly cruel. She organized quiet prayer circles and small, makeshift school lessons to keep the younger children engaged. These small acts, often unnoticed, made all the difference in keeping the morale of the group intact. What set Sarah apart was her emotional endurance, her ability to remain composed when others panicked, to offer calm when others despaired. It wasn't that she was fearless. Rather, she learned to carry her fear and move forward anyway. In the face of chaos, she chose reflection over reaction, service over self-pity, and courage over collapse. Sarah's mental resilience became as much a survival tool as any weapon or map. And while others found strength in brute force, she discovered hers in empathy, endurance, and the power of the written word. As Sarah Raymond and the wagon train pushed deeper into the Western territories, they entered lands long inhabited by Native American tribes, regions rich in culture, tradition, and history. To the settlers, these lands were often seen as unclaimed frontiers, but to the native peoples, they were sacred spaces, homes passed down through generations. It was within these lands that Sarah experienced some of the most tense, eye-opening, and complex moments of her journey. In the early days of the crossing, the mere mention of native tribes would send uneasy murmurs through the camp. Fueled by rumors and exaggerated stories passed along by other travelers, fear spread like wildfire. Tales of ambushes, raids, and massacres were recounted around campfires, often without proof, but with deep conviction. Many in the wagon train began sleeping with rifles at their sides, and guards were posted every night. Sarah, however, remained quietly skeptical. She had read enough, even back in Illinois, to know that conflict was never one-sided. She suspected that fear often masked a deeper misunderstanding. The first encounter came unexpectedly. It was a clear, dry morning when a small group of native men appeared on a distant ridge, mounted and watching silently. The wagon train froze. Some men reached for their weapons. Sarah stood still, her breath caught in her throat, not from fear but from awe. The men were proud and poised, adorned with feathers, leather, and paint, symbols of a culture that had long thrived on this very land. After tense minutes, the men disappeared over the ridge without approaching. No arrows were fired, no words exchanged, but the impact of the moment lingered. Days later, the caravan approached a river crossing and found it blocked by a group of native families, men, women, and children. This time, a cautious dialogue began. Through a mix of hand gestures, broken English, and the help of a traveler who had some knowledge of tribal languages, communication unfolded. Sarah watched closely as the exchange played out. The native group was not hostile. They were simply protecting their fishing area and seeking fair trade. In return for flour, cloth, and tobacco, they offered fresh fish, handmade tools, and guidance on a safer path around the river bend. Sarah was struck by the humanity of it all. These were not the savage caricatures so often portrayed in stories back home. These were people protecting their land, their way of life, and their families. It was a profound lesson in empathy, and one she would carry for the rest of the journey. Yet not every interaction was peaceful. Tensions ran high as food supplies dwindled and misunderstandings escalated. One night, after a miscommunication led to accusations of theft, weapons were drawn. It was Sarah who stepped between the parties, calmly, respectfully, using her voice and presence to defuse what could have become a deadly clash. Her ability to see beyond the stereotypes, to treat others with dignity regardless of their culture, made her a bridge between two worlds. These encounters challenged the biases of many in the wagon train. For Sarah, they deepened her sense of justice and respect for those whose lives had been disrupted by westward expansion. She began recording these events in her journal with careful detail, not just as a witness, but as someone slowly coming to terms with the uncomfortable truths of America's growth. The land was not empty. The people were not voiceless. And every mile forward was a step in a land already claimed by centuries of history. By the time Sarah Raymond's wagon train reached the distant edges of the western frontier, she was no longer the same girl who had left Illinois. She had endured hardships that would have broken many adults: grueling weather, disease, leadership under pressure, and the emotional strain of watching families collapse along the trail. Her clothes were threadbare, her hands calloused, and her youthful face was now marked by the sun, wind, and sorrow. And yet, in her eyes burned something fierce: survival, wisdom, and an unshakable determination to start again. The final days of the journey were among the most difficult. Supplies were dangerously low, and the land grew more rugged. Every creak of the wagon wheels, every stumble of the oxen, felt like a reminder of how fragile the line between success and failure truly was. Yet, through it all, Sarah pushed forward, driven by a vision that had grown stronger with each passing mile. Not just of reaching a destination, but of creating a new life. Not the romanticized ideal sold in Eastern newspapers, but something real, hard-earned, and rooted in truth. When the wagon train at last rolled into the open valley that marked their intended settlement, emotions surged through the travelers. Some wept openly, others dropped to their knees and prayed. For Sarah, the moment was strangely quiet. She stood beside the wagon, her journal clutched to her chest, and took in the horizon. The land stretched out wide before her, untamed and raw. There were no buildings, no roads, no welcome signs, only opportunity and uncertainty. What made this moment extraordinary for Sarah wasn't just the arrival. It was the transformation. She had begun this journey as a teenage girl dependent on her father, unsure of what lay ahead, but filled with hope. Now, she was a young woman shaped by experience, someone who had protected her family, led through crisis, bridged cultural gaps, and held fast to compassion when others lost it. The future was unwritten, the challenges far from over, but for the first time in months, she felt the stirrings of something long absent: possibility. Settling into this new land meant facing fresh difficulties. Shelter had to be built, crops planted, livestock cared for. It would take years before the community resembled the towns they'd left behind. But Sarah approached it with the same resolve she had shown on the trail. Each sunrise became a marker of progress. Each task completed, a fence built, a well dug, was an act of defiance against everything that had tried to break her along the way. She continued to write, her journal pages now filled not only with memories of hardship, but with observations of growth. Her words painted vivid pictures of the valley, the people she had journeyed with, and the lives being rebuilt from nothing. And always, beneath those words, ran a current of quiet, unwavering strength. The strength of a survivor, of a leader, and of a pioneer who had earned her place through sheer will. Today, her name may not appear in textbooks, but her spirit lives on in the countless untold stories of women who helped shape the American frontier. Quiet heroes whose bravery carved the very path we walk upon. Let her journey remind us that even in the harshest of times, resilience, compassion, and quiet determination can light the way forward.